So we've created this double-headed slider, and it seems to be working pretty well, but there's one issue that with the sliding that just is not right. And to talk about it, we have to go to the iOS Human Interface Guidelines. And this is at developer.apple.com. And they make a very specific point of saying that any tappable area should be a minimum of 44 points by 44 points. Anything smaller, and the user may try to tap it with their finger and miss, and not like that's a negative experience. And what did I do? Well, I created a slider height of 32 up here, and then down here in the thumb, I created a circle radius of 13.5, which means that the circles are only 27 points wide. So not 44. We need to fix this. We need to make it easier to drag the thumbs. And, in the process of doing that, we're going to solve a couple other little issues with the dragging. Let's get started with a new modifier on the thumb. After we set the frame, we're going to do content shape. And what content shape does is it lets you set the shape of the tappable area for the view. Returns a new view that defines the content shape for hit testing. So you can make it so that different parts of a view can be tapped or not tapped. We're going to use this to expand the tappable area of the view, but it's going to take a little bit of work, because if we just say tappable area rectangle, what we have is we have a content shape that's the same size as that circle, but we want something larger than that. So we're going to create a background, and it's going to just be a rectangle with a foreground color of that yellow. Whoops. That yellow to start. And let's bring back our canvas. And so we get these little yellow rectangles behind the circle. But now we're going to set that frame. And we're going to set its width to 64, more than 44. And the same with its height. And so that's going to be our new tappable, draggable area there. Not just the thumb itself, but that whole area around it. And now I'm just going to take this content shape out of there. And instead of it being a modifier on the whole thumb, it's going to be a modifier on this background rectangle. And so now I have a thumb with a background rectangle of a size of 64 and a content shape that's just that rectangle. So if I change that to clear, now you can't see it, but if I run, I should be able to tap anywhere in that big area there and still drag. And I can. So that's taken care of. But there's another issue here. It was there before, but it's more pronounced now that we have this bigger tappable area. And that's that I can tap there, and not only do I start dragging, but the thumb jumps to the new position. And that makes a lot of sense when you look at the drag code here. Uh, when the drag changes, we set the position to the location of the drag, and then we go from there to figure out the rest. But what we really want to do is we want to move the thumb based on how much the user has dragged, not move the thumb to where the user started dragging. It's a minor difference, but it's an important one. So we're going to change this onChanged closure here. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the translation of the value instead of the location. Let's take a look at drag gesture here. Drag gesture passes in a value, it has a location, that's what we've been reading, but it also has a translation. And the translation represents the distance that the drag has moved since it started. So if we can get the position of the thumb when the drag starts and then the translation, that's all we need to change the value of the, based on the drag. So let's do that. But first, let's get the position of the thumb at this point. And we'll call it drag start equals self dot horizontal value for self dot max value given geometry, spelled correctly. And then we can make position, instead of being this value here, be drag start dot x plus value dot translation dot x. Now drag start, oh wait a minute, drag start is just a float, right? Okay, so we don't need that there. But now, and a translation uses width. It's a size, not a point. But now, we don't want this drag start to be set every time we go through onChanged. We only want it to be set when we start a drag. So really, it has to be a new state variable. So I'll come up here. Let's say state var private var drag start is a CG float. We're not going to worry about the y value, just the x value. And let's go back to this. Now, right now, horizontal value is returning float. Okay. Now, when we call this value for position, way back when we first wrote value for position, we said that it took a point. But the only thing we've ever worried about with this position is the x value. We've never worried about the y value. So let's forget about that. Let's just make it a CG float. And we're going to break some things when we do that. But this is in our min value. You know what? We're just going to comment out this gesture for now, and we'll bring it back when we have this one down here working. So now we're calculating things out, but we still haven't dealt with this issue of the drag start. So let's do this. If nil equals drag start, a lot of people would say drag start equals nil. I got into the habit of putting the nil in front just because of an old practice. Then we're going to set it. We're going to set our self.dragStart here. And that tells us that a drag is started. So this stuff down here, we don't need that anymore. I'm going to move this right up here. Now, drag start should definitely be set at this point because either it was set when we entered the closure or it just got set there. So we're going to make things easy ourselves. We're going to say guard let drag start equals self that drag start else return. It's really got to be set, but it absolutely can't be nil. All right, and then we set the position, and then we figure out the new value, and then we have this. Well, we called that on editing changed already, and this self.dragging, well, we know that it's dragging because drag start isn't nil. So we really don't need that. Similarly here, we need this. Well, we don't need to set that. We just have to set drag start equals nil. And what did we do? We just eliminated the need for this dragging state var. So we'll build that. And we only have the max value thumb working now, but let's test it. So I click there, and I click and drag, and not only does it drag for me, but it doesn't jump. It just moves the same distance that my cursor moves. If I click way outside, then it doesn't, but if I'm anywhere inside this 64 by 64 rectangle, it drags for me. All right, so let's take that. We'll clean it up a little. We'll get rid of all these comments. And let's do the same thing with the other thumb. Big difference is anywhere that we see max value, we need to use min value. And that's it. And then self.min value has to be the min of the new value and max value. That was that clamping that we did before. And we'll just test that. And so I can do the same thing with the min thumb. Much better, much more intuitive, smoother dragging experience. And there's one more thing that I'd like to do to make dragging a little bit simpler here. Remember when we drag the min value thumb under the max value thumb, all of a sudden we can't move the min value thumb again because the max value thumb is on top of it. Well, now that we have this content shape attached to each of these, maybe we can use that to make an area over here that can be dragged for the min content thumb and over here for the max content thumb. So we're going to come back to here, we're going to come back to thumb, and we're going to add an extra parameter here. We're going to call it drag offset. And it's going to be an int. And it's going to affect the content shape. Actually, it's going to affect this. Well, yeah, the content shape. And we're going to give the content shape an offset depending on drag offset. So if drag offset is 0, we're not going to do anything. But otherwise, I'm going to put another ternary operator in here. If drag offset is less than 0, I want to move this content shape 32 to the left. And if it's greater than 0, I want to move it 32 to the right. Oh, we want this to just be the X, not the, we don't want to worry about the Y direction. Okay, now we just broke these two places because they want a drag offset. So we'll put drag offset here, and again we'll use a ternary operator because most of the time we want this content offset to be right on top of the thumb. We don't want to worry about it. We don't want it to be moved around. But if the two thumbs are on the same spot, if one of them's directly above the other, then we want to change the drag offset. So we're going to say self.min value equals self.max value. Well, in that case, we want to move this min value thumb to the left. Otherwise, we don't want to move it. We want it to be 0. We want the drag offset to be 0. The max value thumb is going to be the exact opposite. If min value and max value are the same, then we want to move it to the right. And otherwise, we want it to be directly on top of the thumb. Let's try this now. So we'll move this min value thumb underneath the max value thumb, and we'll start dragging just a little bit to the left, and there we go. If we start from a little bit to the right, we can move the top one. That is simple and intuitive and works pretty well. If you start right over the thumbs, then it doesn't, but if you start just a little bit to the left, which is what people kind of do intuitively, then it works. One more thing. Let's see, before we were solving a more particular case by changing the z index of both of these thumbs. Let's see if we still need that code. Let's just comment that out there. And also there. And try again. And now that we have these content shape offset things here, let's see. I can have them right on top of each other, start dragging just a little bit to the left of the area, and drag the min value thumb back. So I don't need that z-index stuff anymore. And so the double-headed slider is basically done. It looks like an iOS slider. It has two thumbs. If I drag the thumb on the left, I change the lower value. If I drag the thumb on the right, I change the upper value. I can make them be the same, and I can drag them away from each other. Basically done. I'd like to make one more change to the appearance of the slider, and that's to add a optional label on the left and right hand side of the slider, just like an iOS slider does. And I'd also like to talk a little bit about the programming interface of this class, but that will be the next video.